All right, we're live, and I'm very excited to introduce you all to today's guest. On today's episode, I interview the host of The Realness, Connor Wanners, and OK Babe. He's the creative director of Soulfire Productions, which he's created with his partner, Kelli Tennant, to push the boundaries of podcasting in a community that helps podcasters launch, grow, and monetize their shows. On today's episode, welcome to the winner circle, Connor Moore.
What's up, man? It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while since we last connected in Texas, and you are now in Denver, Colorado.
Love it here, man. It's all the good things about Texas plus mountains.
Yeah, awesome. So it's a really weird time in the world right now. A lot of negativity out there, and that is not what this podcast is about. This podcast is positive with the goal to uplift, inspire, and empower others. And that leads us into my first question. Connor Moore, what do you love about your world right now?
Man, I love that question. So, recently I've shifted away from personal development, and that's where the majority of my time and content was created from. And I've moved into talking like politics and social issues, which has been, to me, it actually feels like so much more of myself. Like it's something I've cared about for a long time, but I always just kind of kept to myself, and being able to speak up. It's interesting because with personal development, it was aligned and it was authentic for sure. I really cared about what I was talking about, but I like went to a new level and a new level of self-expression in talking about politics and understanding these things. And I really love pattern recognition and trying to understand like the nuance to all these different ideas and concepts. And really at the end of the day, I feel like politics are a gigantic human behavior experiment anyways. So being able to break into that and play with that on a regular basis, really, it excites me. Every week I'm excited to get into it. Every now and then I get frustrated and get a little down because it can be a little toxic, but I have a pretty good set of boundaries to keep that from interfering with my life too much. But I really love that I'm able to think critically and speak loudly about things that I believe in. Like that feels more like I'm able to do that more now than I ever have been able to before.
Mm-hmm. That's very exciting to hear. And one thing that you've taught me in the relationship that we formed is the importance of a mission. All companies have missions. And we as human beings should have missions, our guiding light, not only in our professional work, but our personal life and everywhere in between. So my mission, which is always changing, but my current mission is to pursue truth and to spread love. What is your mission, Connor Moore?
Well, my mission, really, if I was to narrow it down, I think that it's my responsibility to share intellectual honesty and perspective. So I try and do that every time I'm on the show, every time I'm speaking, and when people are listening. I think that intellectual honesty is something we've missed a lot of in our world, and divisiveness has now become really advantageous to certain people, specifically people in power. So I think that when it comes down to it, my goal is and what my mission is here is to speak with intellectual honesty and share perspectives, mine or others, in a way that people can embrace and kind of infuse into their own lives.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds kind of like what your win looks like for you today. And that's the course that you helped lead, where I met you, is the course called Go For Your Win, where we learned about the importance of the process over destination. We lived in a very destination-oriented society. When I get this job, when I get this career, when I get this relationship, when I get this house, this car, this etc., I'll be happy. And then when we get there, it's like, oh, fuck, now what? Because we're missing the sweetness of the journey, and that is the process, the path there. And when we focus our attention on that process, that journey, doors will open where we otherwise would have never seen, kind of like this podcast for me. So what does going for your win mean to you today, Connor? And what does your win look like for you in your life right now?
Man, as surface level as this may seem, I feel that gaining an audience is really where my focus is, and growing the audience and creating quality discourse. So when I think about growing an audience, it's not necessarily a numbers game, right? I have this Patreon community that I started that I really love, and there's only a handful of people in there as we get this thing started. It's brand new, But what I found is that we can put these people in a place where now I'm in charge, right? Which means we can have open conversation. We can have open dialogue. And whenever I hear someone reach out to me that follows me on my podcast or on social media and says, I don't always agree with you, but I appreciate that you are willing to say what you say, that every day that feels like a win. And if I can bring those people into a community where they can do that with one another and find common ground and maybe create progress and have like productive arguments, right? Not, somebody calling somebody racist and somebody calling somebody else a communist, right? Like that doesn't really do anything. That doesn't really like move us forward. When I can facilitate and be a part of productive conversations, every time that feels like a win. And I feel like the more people I can impact through that, the more people I can bring into the community or impact with my shows, all of that seems like a win. Like it very much is a win through process. And that's something I'm just crazy grateful for at this point in my life.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your shows. Tell me a bit more about your shows. I introduced the three of them in the introduction: the Realness, Connor Wanners, and Okay Babe, which you co-host with your partner, Kelli. Let's hear a bit about those shows for the audience that aren't familiar with them.
Yeah, so the Realness has been the show I've been doing for about 5 years, and it's always been an interview show. There's been a few solo episodes on there, but mostly it's 99% interviews, and we just get into fun topics. I mean, I kind of started that thing off being a little bit irreverent with personal development, right? So maybe even challenging the ideas. For example, I did a show on the power of negative thinking, right? Like how that can be like a balance, right? It's like understand your worst case scenario, become comfortable with that. And it was in a way of using negative thinking to increase your ability to be courageous in your actions, right? So that's kind of the approach. I always would, whatever the mainstream idea was, I would like shift to the left or right of that and then present it from a different perspective. That was what the kind of conversations I enjoyed having. And I had a really great network of people, especially in the personal development space, that we could have these conversations. But now it's shifted into talking mostly about politics and social issues because it kind of shifts and ebbs and flows with me, but it's still my interview show. It's where we're having conversations with either me and somebody else or me and two other people. What Connor Wanders is like my personal playground. So every week we jump in there. I do at least 3, sometimes 4, maybe 5 topics where I'm breaking down like what's happened this week in the world and news, updating people on things that are, I feel, important, right? Because there's a bunch of news every week, but like what actually matters, right? So whether that's Joe Biden's executive orders, I know everybody in Canada is really has their opinions about the Keystone Pipeline, like talking about stuff like that. And then at the end of every show, I have a segment called Something to Think About, which isn't me telling you how to think or what to think. It's, hey, maybe view this thing through a different perspective. Or for example, this week it was diversifying your news feed, like finding diverse people that you don't agree with, like basically taking responsibility for not living in an echo chamber on social media. Like just how much difference, like I don't like Candace Owens at all. I don't like her politics. If anybody knows who that is, super conservative. But I listen to what she has to say. And I try and like do it through a lens of non-judgment, even though I'm like arguing with her in my mind as I listen to it. I'm still going to hear her that perspective. And maybe that's Tucker Carlson on Fox News, someone else I don't really jive with, or someone on the far left, like an actual communist, like see what they have to say. And doing that, I felt like actually made it more fun and enjoyable versus just hearing what I want to hear all the time. Like I like to bring up those topics and just like give somebody an idea and something to think about. And in the very same vein, on Okay Babe, my partner Kelli and I kind of just challenge traditional relationship concepts and talk about what we're going through and challenges with monogamy and non-monogamy and bringing other people into those conversations and just having really open and vulnerable conversations about what we're going through as a couple. Not that we're doing it the right way or that ours is like an example for anybody, but it does, I think, in the similar way that the Realness and Connor Wanders work, share perspective on something that at least maybe get you outside of your normal frame of thinking. And I think that's beneficial, right? It's kind of, again, intellectually honest and also kind of infuses curiosity, right? So it's like, even if you don't have any interest in doing any of the crazy shit that we do, you still get to hear someone talk about it. And maybe that style of communicating we have, you can infuse into your relationship and maybe that's beneficial for you. Or maybe you just laugh about it and think it's funny. Like that's where we come at it with Okay Babe. And it's super fun because Kelli and I are so different. So she comes in very structured and soulful and I'm just kind of a big goofy doofus, which is fun for me because I just get to let loose and have a good time. I don't have to like be that organized. I just say what I think and say what I feel.
And together you guys created Soulfire Productions. Tell me a bit more about that.
Man, Soulfire has been really cool. So that was Kelly's idea, and I actually had a handful of doubts about that in the beginning, but she was like, I've never had a podcast production company. Maybe for a little bit at the beginning, like kind of, but not. I've always kind of done my own thing. So I was like, I don't know, does anybody even really need a podcast production company? But she had one that she hated. She hated them so much. She was like, these are too expensive. We hate this. And I was like, well, if we're gonna do this, let's do a podcast production company. We had a team developing of people that I'd worked with before and people that were doing audio editing and video editing. But I was like, let's create a podcast network on top of this. That way we have our production side where we do audio, video, all that kind of fun stuff for social media and podcasting and YouTube. And then we'll create a podcast network where now we connect all of our hosts within our network with each other. And most of the people in there in personal development, or we have a lawyer, or we have a few other different kinds of people, but they now get to get back and forth and go get into it. And like they create these fun conversations amongst themselves. And we have a monthly mastermind where we get in there and talk about what's going on with podcasting, what's going on with content, what's going on in the world. How can you talk about the current events that are happening in your world without picking a side or alienating part of your audience? Like, how can you use your content to bring people together? We get together and have those conversations as a group. And that's really cool. So it's really kind of, I don't know anybody else who does it the way that we do. There's a few other podcast networks out there and podcast production, but nobody's really put it together in the way that we have with Soulfire, and people love it, man. It's super fun. And watching these people's shows, people that have these small to medium sized shows, are growing and they're growing their business. And our goal for them, like Soulfire is not cheap, but our goal is, if you join this network, we want you to be making enough money that whatever you're spending on ours becomes neutral, right? Like you're making, maybe it's $1,500 a month or whatever your package is. I want you to be saving enough time that you're making that much more money every month anyways. Right? Like you're growing at that rate. That's kind of the way we look at it, where it ends up being a cost neutral situation, and we're benefiting them, they're benefiting us. And we have this really cool symbiotic relationship, and everybody's growing, and you get introduced to this, like by bringing together, we have 35 shows now, 35 different hosts, and then everybody else's network. You end up creating really, really cool conversations, and it gets really, really broad, which is so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so great, Connor. Let's hit the rewind button and let's look back at what got you to where you are now, with your 3 podcasts, with Soulfire Productions, with this great relationship with Kelly. Let's hit the rewind all the way back till you want to take it, and give us the origin story that brought you here.
Man, I love putting the dots together, looking backwards. So I grew up in this small Texas town, and 9,000 people, Bible Belt, super conservative town. And I was conservative kind of by default, right? I mean, I was aggressively pro-life for some reason when I was like 14. Like I thought that was an opinion that I needed to have, and anti-immigration, just whatever Rush Limbaugh would say, right? Like this kooky, weird conservative guy. And I got outside of my norm, and I started going to Austin when I was about 16, and I loved Austin. It was kind of this like liberal hub of Texas, and I ended up getting injured playing football my freshman year of college and had to quit playing ball. So I ended up going to Texas State, which is like half an hour south of Austin, and just being in a different environment, like getting out of my small town, which most people, it's intimidating to leave a small town. And if anybody listening's ever grown up in a small town, it's hard to leave because small town life is very simple. And moving from somewhere like Graham, Texas to Austin, Texas is incredibly intimidating. So you got to learn like where to park, where do I register my car? How do I do, all these different things. And it took me a couple of years to figure that out. But once I got to Austin, I was able to meet a very diverse set of people, diverse ideas, diverse racially, whatever it may be, and really started challenging my own ideas of where I had come from and what I had done with my life and how I thought. And so for me, I saw this big change from being like a very closed-minded kind of conservative person that had this itch of always like curiosity, but never let it really flourish, into moving into a space where I was able to really challenge ideas. And then I realized as a CrossFit coach and a weightlifting coach that if I look back on it, I always challenge the conventional wisdom, right? If it's like, well, this is the way you're supposed to do a snatch, I would go find somebody who had a different way of teaching it. right? That was the complete opposite and had different ideas. I wouldn't just follow the common narrative. And that pisses people off, right? Especially the people that are like maybe your boss, which I've never really had a great relationship with a boss. It's never really worked out very well for me because I'm a contrarian, and I love to argue for the sake of arguing and kind of just share perspectives. And I do that. It takes the right kind of people to be around me and the right kind of people to even listen to my content, because my goal is to challenge you. I may argue a point I don't even believe in just to make your argument stronger. If you bring me a weak argument and I start presenting counterpoints, and maybe they're not my counterpoints, they're just counterpoints that someone may have, I want you to be able to handle those. I want your beliefs and your arguments to be really, really strong. And I also want you to be open-minded enough to criticize yourself, right? And take criticism. So I was doing that in strength and conditioning. I did that when I moved over to Audit, and I started doing the same thing with personal development. And then it's kind of like this place where I've landed in politics now. And it's like, oh, this is where that perspective is actually most valuable, right? So over 4 years of podcasting about personal development, through Go For Your Win and everything I did with Audit, through coaching CrossFit and strength and conditioning and weightlifting, and even back to being like a young kid who just like was kind of an asshole, like all of that it all makes sense when you look back, of being this kind of contrarian thinker who wanted to, whatever the common narrative was, challenge it. And that's because I found so much growth in challenging Christianity, right? Challenging what my beliefs were about my sexuality, all of these different things. And it's hard and it's dangerous sometimes to get in there. It's dangerous psychologically to get in there. So for me, I feel like since I do have the ability to do that, I feel like I almost have this responsibility to do it now, because people can take my experience and maybe not go through the same level of challenge or the same bullshit that I had to go through, but still take the lessons and then create their own chaos in their life however they want to, which, as you know, you're a Jordan Peterson fan, I believe. It's like, you got to have that balance of stability and chaos. And I think that a lot of alignment in life and growth in life is through designed chaos, like very consciously creating chaos in your life in the direction that you want to grow, because that's where you grow through chaos. And I think that that's a really beautiful way to put it. That's one of my foundational principles and I learned that from Jordan Peterson, was creating chaos in the direction that you want to grow. And that's fun. You know, to me, that's fun. And I attract people that find that fun. So we get these really cool conversations out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But you find that fun. But a lot of people, I'd say a large majority of people, find that scary. And fear is the number one thing that holds people back from fulfilling their dreams, from making more of their lives than the status quo. People are born Christian, they just stay in that lens. Republican, they stay in that lens, et cetera, et cetera. This type of weightlifting, this type of whatever, and they just stay in their comfort zone because that is their known world. And even though their known world sucks and they don't enjoy that, at least they know what the next day is going to look like. You've stepped outside of your known world so many times, from your move from Graham to Austin, from your move from fitness to the politics. You challenge yourself and you've stepped into that fear. What is your advice for a hero on their journey who's stuck in their tracks, paralyzed by that unknown, not able to generate that courage to go all in? What would you advise them?
Yeah. So I think there's one thing you need to do is this kind of audit of your life. I used to do this a lot with the clients when I was coaching alongside the Realness. I had my coaching program, and we would do something called an energetic audit, right? And we would lay it out, and it's almost like you're doing your, like you're balancing your checkbook, but for your life. It's like, where's my energy going? And what's the return on that energetic investment, right? So let's just use the easy example of like a job or a relationship. Like if you're putting in a ton of your energy, but you're not getting much back out of that energetically. I mean, and not maybe financially that's important, but maybe in, friendships or relationships or where you're spending your time, maybe you're playing a bunch of video games, like whatever that is, like, is it returning on your investment of energy? So once you're able to kind of understand that, you've got to start letting go of the things that don't have a return, that aren't fulfilling you in a certain way. And with that, you create space. And with that space, you can create chaos, right? But you've got to have the stability. This is one of the things that I find irresponsible that a lot of people in self-help and personal development do, is like, quit your job, do your own thing, be your own boss. And that's like the advice, right? But there's a more pragmatic way to approach that. You don't have to do it all tomorrow. And I think that's the thing that scares people. It's like, I've got to let go of my entire life and do that to make this other thing happen. And that's not necessarily true. You've got to let go of some things, maybe, and you've got to invest that time somewhere else. And you've got to be really comfortable maybe being the dumbest person in the room about a thing at first, right? Maybe it's jujitsu is a good example. When you go in there, you're going to get your ass kicked. You're a white belt. You're just figuring it out. It's scary. But if you do that for 2 years, then you're teaching the white belt what's going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're progressing through that. But that initial step is the scariest step, right? And if you can create enough space in your life where you have the energy to invest in something that's going to be, the returns are different, right? It's more energetically expensive at the beginning because you're figuring things out and you're learning. Once you can get into a flow with things, boom, now that's a part of your daily life, right? And you can make another shift. And you end up constantly making these and consistently making these little shifts in life. And before you know it, like your whole entire world has changed. But it's not about a humongous shift all at once. It's about a handful of 2 or 3 degree shifts that over 10 years add up to you being a completely different person and having grown in ways that you really weren't even privy to existing. And that to me is a more sustainable way of growing. And it creates this positive feedback loop in your life of like, okay, this isn't challenging me enough. I have a energy that I can expend creating more chaos in my life in a way that's constructive for me. Let me go do that. Let me just be curious about a thing. And if you try something and hate it, you can always let it go. But at least then you know, and you've created more context. And I think when you have more context on what fulfills you, what excites you, what gets your dopamine rolling, then you can make better decisions. But a lot of us, if you live inside that frame of just this style of life and you don't challenge that to get more context, you're really limiting the amount of free will that you have. You know what I mean? So you're limiting that like freedom to make decisions because you don't consider things that you don't know are possible.
Absolutely. And I think that has a lot to do with space. And I'd like to talk a bit more about space. Is people are not used to space. Space is so unknown to most people. They're filling that up with various forms of consumption, whether that be alcohol, drugs, shopping, sex, busy work in social media, workaholism, right? Because in that space we're able to listen, and people are scared of what comes up. So how have you dealt with space and used space to your advantage?
Honestly, for me, and I don't know if I'd recommend this for everybody, but I filled that space with learning as much as I can, right? So for me, and a lot of that it comes down to be really critical, but I have to have these reset moments in my life. I do that through hunting or getting out into the wilderness, right? That's my time. It's like I can burn the candle at both ends for a little while, and then I've got to have 2 days in the woods. Like I'm just not doing, I'm just thinking and reflecting. That's how I've set my life up. But a lot of times I think it's the noticing that's the most important part, right? If you notice that it's like, man, I have nothing left, like that energetic audit, like I was telling you about, like maybe you're spending so much energy on Instagram and not getting much back besides anxiety, right? Well, then you have to change that relationship. Maybe you're deleting it off your phone for a little while. You've got to, a lot of it comes down at the end of the day to personal responsibility, right? Like making like kind of self-parenting is another way a lot of people put it, like learning how to parent yourself, like maybe grounding yourself for the weekend, right? So you're not out drinking and messing around. Not that we can do that during COVID, but it's making these small decisions, and they become easier as time goes on, right? It becomes a very easy thing to notice, and you're essentially creating mindfulness around where your energy goes and shifting as necessary. And I think that's really, really important. But you got to be able to, again, create that space, and to know how to create space, you have to know how to let go of something that's not really working for you. You know what I mean? And so it comes down to that. It comes down to that mindfulness piece and being able to just be like, all right, this is going to sting, but it's the best thing for me going forward, you know?
So let's give the listeners some examples. What is something that you've recently let go of that was no longer serving you? And what did that process look like for you?
Oh man, you know what it was? Actually, it's funny you say that, is the realness. I always take the back part of December off. Like we do like one episode in December, then the rest of the time. And I don't usually get started till like early January, maybe like January 10th. I'll usually put out another episode.
Yeah. And
this year I was like, listen, I've got these other things going on. They're working really well. I feel really good about it. I have this anxiety and fear about not putting out a Realness episode and people being upset about that. But this thing is changing and needs a little room to breathe. And I've just got to not do it. I've just got to not, maybe I won't put out one out till the summertime. You know, I've got to really rework. I want this thing. I have to put the brakes on this thing that I love and I've been doing for 5 years, and it's given me so much in my life. But right now things are different. There's more important conversations to be had. There's maybe more valuable things for me to do with my time. And it's not that I don't want to, but it's that it's not really doing what I need it to do right now. And I've got to change to show up to that thing differently. And that's going to take me some time. So I had to just kind of pump the brakes on it for a little while. And if there's still hundreds of episodes there, I'm sure people are still listening to them. I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but that was a hard thing for me, because it's not that podcast is something like inherently special to the whole entire world right now. I'm not Joe Rogan, right? But it's a humongous part of my identity, right? Like I have been the host of the Realness for half a decade. So for me to hit the brakes on that thing took a lot for me to really figure that out. But when I made the decision that it was okay for me to not put out an episode for a few months and figure some things out about where I wanted it to go, it felt like the right decision, but the hard decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it might have been easier for you to do because you've changed your identity many times. You used to identify as an athlete, a football player, and then you had to leave that identity. Then you identified as a CrossFit coach, and then you left that, and then a personal development coach, and then you left that, and so on and so on. And I feel it's just like those small reps, like you said, the more we put in those reps, the easier transitions become in the future.
Well, and that's the thing. I'm really grateful because when I look back, and like I said, I love putting the dots together, going backwards. When I was 19, and I actually ended up rupturing my S1 disc whenever I was working oil and gas construction in the summer after my first year, and I was about to transfer to TCU. I was going to get to play Division I football. I was very excited. I was going to walk on, and it was going to be this whole thing. I was very committed and driven to make that happen. And I ruptured I couldn't even bend over for a year, right? So I could, my leg wouldn't work. It was just a whole thing. And I completely lost my identity at 19. And looking back now, I'm so grateful I had that, because that was the first time. That was the first, I had to really confront how much my identity was tied up into something that I had very little control over at 19. And it's made it easier ever since then. To me, the shift from CrossFit coach to personal development coach to politics doesn't seem that major. Right. I'm still looking at everything through the same lens, because I looked at strength and conditioning through a human behavior lens. I obviously looked at personal development through a human behavior lens. And now I look at politics through a human behavior lens. But my thought is, in those shifts, where do I add the most value? Right. There's lots of people doing great work when it comes to personal development. There's the Mark Mansons of the world that are, and they've even shifted into more cultural things because it's most relevant right now. So for me, it's not about me doing what I love the most necessarily, even though it doesn't tend to work out that way. It's, where do I provide the most value for the people that are listening to what I have to say? And when you have people listening to what you have to say, I feel like that's very important. So it does make it easier whenever you look at it through that, in that context of, this is actually, it's hard and I have to let go part of my identity. But before anything else, before any of the labels of what I am, I'm here to provide perspective and conversations that help people move forward in their life, or maybe even just make them laugh, right? Whatever it is. But that's more important than what my label of CrossFit coach, personal development coach, podcaster, any of this other stuff. That's the bigger picture. And a very clear understanding of that helps a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I know for sure is, you didn't get here alone. You've had many helpers and mentors all throughout your life. So let's take a moment to acknowledge some of these mentors and helpers that have left a notable impact on your development and your learning. And what were your key takeaways from them that you'd like to share with us?
So my first, I would say, really good CrossFit job, I actually worked at this place called CrossFit Central. And I was the youngest anchor, because they had anchor coaches. So that was if you coached noon, early morning, or in the evening. The classes that were basically always going to be full. They would only put the best coaches there. And I was the youngest ever anchor coach in the 5:30 and 6:15 a.m. classes. And those were our biggest classes. They were always full. And if your classes were full, you got paid pretty good. I think we were getting paid like $125 an hour to coach CrossFit, which is pretty unheard of, but it was a really solid business. And my boss, who was kind of a dick, and we didn't really get along, but we respected each other. We just didn't see the world at all. He loved Tony Robbins. And I was like, this is kind of foofy and weird. Wasn't my thing. I loved Mark Manson and Alan Watts, right? We were just different, both with the same intentions, but very different ways of expressing ourselves. And but we would have these funny conversations where we'd get into it about money or, about just like life and what the purpose of this whole business was. And we had these really fun conversations. But one day he was like, Connor, people don't like you. And I was like, yeah, I know. He goes, but some people just fucking love you. And he goes, that's what I want in a coach. I don't want people to like be wishy-washy about how they feel about somebody. I want you to be polarizing. And it's better if people have to make a decision. Either they hate you or they love you, but they make a decision about you and they remember you because of that. And that's what I want in someone. And that's okay. And I was like, I've taken that with me my entire life. Like, that's why I don't get upset about people not liking me on the internet. Like, it's like, well, good, because there's other people on the other end of that spectrum who think that what I do is awesome. And I listen to both people equally because both views are valid, but you're going to make it, there's very few people that are like, I don't know about him. It's like either he's an asshole or he's great. Like, that's kind of where I live my life. And that was really, really helpful. Of course, working with Aubrey at Audit was really interesting and challenging. And I took a lot away from that. I don't think I have any like really specific mantras that I brought away from him, but that experience as a whole with Audit and Aubrey showed me a lot about what I want and what I don't want. What's valuable to me and what's not valuable to me, because what happened when you're in that community is that you get pretty much instant relevance. Like, now I'm relevant to a certain community because of association. And what I realized is that I don't really belong in a situation where I'm relevant due to somebody else, right? Like, I didn't want to ride someone's coattails. And I know that sounds bad and that sounds kind of dickish, and I understand that, but there's part of me that just wanted to do it my way. And that was something I was never going to be able to do in that environment. And one of the reasons I'm glad that I'm not in that environment anymore, even though I'm very appreciative of that opportunity and that experience, and I learned so much. I mean, Soulfire wouldn't exist. What we do at Soulfire is what I did at Audit, right? So it's like the same thing. But I realized that me leaving Austin was one of the biggest leaps of faith in my life. And I wouldn't have done that if it wouldn't have been for the Audit experience. So for me, like, everything that I get to do now and get to be now, even if it was kind of in opposition to that experience, is because of that experience. And that's something I'm really, really grateful for as well.
Mm-hmm. It all happened to you, for you versus to you.
Exactly.
And that's such a small shift that I think people should consider is there, as are the struggles. And it's having the ability to look at both and choose which direction you want to go. Because if you want to find something to complain about, it's there, no matter how amazing, but there's also so much beauty to be had. And I think a lot of people get stuck in those patterns of just needing to complain or seeing the negative. How do we escape that? How do we escape that pattern?
Somebody else that's really helped me a ton, and I think this will all wrap together, is JP Sears. And everybody loves that guy. He's got a little cookie lately, but he's a fun, interesting, very well thought out guy. And I was really great. I was actually one of the things I had to leave about Austin that I was really sad about was my relationship with JP. Love that guy to death. And one of the things that he brought up is, instead of looking at things through the lens of this happened to me, right, like you were saying, or, oh, this person was manipulative, or this person was narcissistic, instead of looking at it through that lens, which is valid, right? Like, maybe you were in a romantic relationship with somebody who was highly narcissistic and they would gaslit you and made you feel, like you were crazy, which happens all the time. I mean, I've coached dozens of women. Everybody's been in one of those. I mean, it happens. Instead of looking at that and saying, like, what's wrong with this person, looking at it and saying, why was I a good fit for that situation? How did I contribute to that situation? Right. So if you're in a challenging situation and things are really hard for you, it's a simple journaling prompt. Why am I a perfect fit for the situation? Do I always see the best in people, even when they present me with evidence otherwise? Right. How did I contribute to that? And it's not about blame or fault, right? It's about responsibility, right? Like, maybe, I've had challenging relationships, to say the least, with people, anybody who was my boss ever. Right. No exemptions from that. Everybody across the board that's been my boss has had a hard time with me. I'm the common denominator there, right? Because a lot of other people work for those same people and it's fine. Right. So what am I doing? What am I bringing to the table that makes that a challenging situation? How am I contributing to that? And what does that tell me about myself? which is much harder than saying that person's an asshole. That person's the problem. That person did this, right? You've got to look at it and say, why was I the perfect fit for this situation, this job, this relationship? That is where you get the growth from, and there's again, like there's validity to both. And if anybody was in a, I kind of draw the line in that analogy at like abuse, right? Like real physical or mental abuse, different conversation completely. But outside of that, if it was just like a shitty toxic relationship, professional or romantic, you look at yourself and be like, what about me was a perfect fit for that? And that's a really challenging question to ask yourself, but there's a lot of information in there for you. There's a lot of learning in that, I believe. And that's something that JP told me that, again, as a mentor goes, like was really, really helpful for me in a really challenging time when I was questioning kind of everything. So that's I find a lot of value in, for sure.
Sure. Is there any other mentors or helpers that come to mind? We talked with JP, your time at Audit, your CrossFit, anyone else?
Like there's a handful of them. Mike Bledsoe is another good friend of mine who's been around for a long time. And we've been kind of through the ringer together. I've known the barbell shrug guys for a long time. Somebody I don't bring up often that I was just thinking about the other day, and I watched an old video I had on Instagram, was Chris Moore. And I don't know if you know Chris Moore or heard of Chris Moore. He was, if you're familiar with Barbell Shrugged, the podcast back in the early days, he was one of the original hosts. Okay. And he unfortunately passed away in his mid-30s, some kind of random heart failure situation, really, really sad, and left behind a really great wife and a couple of really cool kids. But he had this podcast called The Barbell Buddha. And he was a powerlifter, just a big dude, and just a funny, like just big-hearted guy. And I saw a lot of myself in him and the way that he carried himself and the way that he thought. And that old podcast, I mean, I highly recommend going to listen to it. The audio quality isn't very good. Like it's an old school podcast, like a 2008 podcast, right? But the way that he viewed movement, the way he viewed life, the philosophers that he introduced me to, like Alan Watts, I don't think I give him enough credit because it was so long ago. But Chris Moore is somebody who fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life. And that's something I'm glad you even brought that up, because I haven't like dug deep enough to think about how much of an impact that guy had on me. And when he did pass away, that was really hard for a lot of us, because everybody just loved the shit out of that guy. It was hard not to love Chris Moore. He was the best. So really, really big impact on my life through that man, for sure. And this, I mean, you just got to think, like, as somebody who was into spirituality and growth, and that became my career before politics and stuff. The Barbell Buddha was like, that was like, we were using Buddhism in weightlifting, right? Like it was a really cool way to go about movement. And it's something that shifted me completely.
Mm-hmm. Another ally that's been on your path the last few years, a huge notable addition to your life, is Kelli, your partner.
Oh yeah.
So let's talk about what you've learned from Kelli, in particular about relationships with a significant other, but also just relationships in general. What has she taught you?
I mean, she has changed so much throughout our relationship, right? And there was something really special about the way that she was ready to change. She was ready for something different, and she was ready to challenge herself. And it was like, I wandered into her life at the right time to just be a catalyst for that. And it wasn't like it was one-sided. I've changed a lot in our relationship, right? Like we've both changed so much, but there was something about the stability and safety of our relationship that happened really early on that allowed us to try some different things and to challenge ourselves and challenge each other. And if I look at our relationship now, we're almost like 2 years in now, versus how it was 6 months in. Like it's just a completely different relationship. And COVID had a big part of that too. Like the first couple months of COVID were really hard for both of us, because I thrive. I'm very extroverted. I like to go out to the coffee shop, and I get a lot of my creativity from being out around people. And even now, like it drives me fucking crazy not being able to go do all my work in a crowded place. That's where I love things. And she's completely different. And she's also very much into spirituality, right? Like and I trust her in that part of our lives, right? Which gave me the freedom to kind of step out of that world. I was like, that's her world. That's where she functions. I of course care a lot about that, but she leads the relationship in that. And there's the very specific areas of our relationship where she leads or I lead. It's a very balanced situation. Like she's the stable one, I'm the creative one, right? She's the CEO, I'm the creative director, right? Like that's kind of how our relationship functions. So for me, it's like, let's go do this fun thing. Let's go do this exciting thing. Let's try something new. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let me take you hunting. Let me do whatever. And for her, it's like, hey, like she's grounding. She's in that balance is something I've never had. And it took me a couple of years of being single and being out in the world to even be prepared to create a partnership like that. And it's been really eye-opening. Like, I'm just so proud of her, right? Because she's changed. I mean, and the thing is, like, she's changed in ways that she didn't know were possible, but that provide so much growth and fulfillment for her. And it's been the same for me, right? The stability of our relationship has given me the courage and the ability to create chaos in new podcasts, or with this new business we created, or challenging, traditional relationship structures, or whatever it may be, buying a house in Denver, and maybe even looking at moving out into the country and like having 10 acres, like these different things that I was like, so outside the realm of my possibilities, right? Like that I hadn't even considered as possible. And we do that for each other. And I find that the balance in that is really, really fun and really beautiful for both of us. But it's been challenging, but I don't want to paint it as like this, we like worked for this and it was super hard, because at the end of the day, looking back on it, it doesn't feel like that hard considering what we've gotten out of those times. I think sometimes, especially with relationships, everybody wants to paint it as like how much work it is, and to create this beautiful relationship is all this work. It doesn't feel that way to me. And maybe I'm wrong or weird, I don't know, but it's been this finding that balance with someone is something I'm incredibly grateful for, because I've just never had it before. So it feels to me, even 2 years in, feels really new and fun and exciting, because we have accepted that our relationship will change and flow as we change and flow. And with that, we have appropriate expectations, right? We have expectations. I'm not gonna say we're like expectationless, but our expectations are on things that we can control, and the things that are outside of our control, we let happen, and we create that stability, chaos, balance within the relationship really well, whether it's our personalities or the way that we do things.
Mm-hmm. From what I heard, a core foundation of this relationship was creating a stable and safe space with each other. How did you guys do that?
Well, I want to say it's a little bit unfair in how we did it, because we met right when she was about to do ayahuasca for the first time. So we got to know each other through the chaos of her integration, right? So from the jump, I was like a safe space for her to say whatever she felt and whatever she needed to say and express herself. And so the logical, next step for that is for her to be that for me. So our relationship started as this kind of symbiotic, growth-centered relationship, which I think obviously is a little bit uncommon. It's uncommon that you meet somebody through your podcast and then they go do ayahuasca and their integration is really challenging, and you're the only person they know that knows what integration of ayahuasca is like. So we started out with this kind of really vulnerable conversations before we were even dating or even considering dating. So as we got to know each other, that was kind of the way that our relationship grew, was from that place. So it's a little bit unique in that way, but I think there's ways to do that within relationships in appropriate timing, right? But just given the way that ours was a little bit fast tracked, right? We moved in together like 3 months after we met, so it was a little bit fast tracked, and I don't recommend that to anybody. But we both were like, this is either going to go perfect or it's going to go down in flames, one or the other. But hey, let's see what happens,
Mm-hmm. So, what we're talking about plant medicine, what role has plant medicine had on your journey? And could you have gotten to where you are now without plant medicine? Because not everyone will be open to that. So can you get to where you are now without plant medicine? So just your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't want to say that where I am is some kind of like elevated place, right? Or some place of enlightenment, or some place that's even very special, right? It's like where I am, I'm very happy with where I am with myself, but I also don't want to project that on anybody else and be like, you should try and get where I am, right?
Yeah.
So I can speak to my own personal experience and say, I don't think I could have the type of life that I have now without it, but I can never know, right? I can never go back and know. I think I needed some kind of intervention, right? Whether that was, if I would have stumbled across the right meditation teacher or the right mentor in that capacity, I probably could have gotten the same results. But I think that I had so much programming in my mind that it was self-imposed, right? Like whether that be religious or personal or whatever, that I kind of needed to take a sledgehammer to it and just kind of rebuild. And that's what plant medicine really did for me. And I didn't overdo it. I actually do it less now than I've ever done it. It was actually kind of an inverse relationship where I did it more at the beginning. And then now it's like very, like I microdose LSD. I may do mushrooms, like a real proper mushroom like journey once a year, maybe. Like even doing ayahuasca once every 2 years seems like a lot to me. It's like, so I space it out and I have a very respectful and conservative relationship with doing like what I would call like heroic doses or larger doses of psychedelics. But I think for me, it was a perfect fit, right? I was mentally stable enough, but I had struggled with depression that I would consider, again, we'll just keep talking about Jordan Peterson here, but like appropriate depression, right? Like I had lost my business back in the day, like things had happened where I should be upset. I should be depressed. I shouldn't be numbing that. I should be feeling that. Right. And the combination of quality conversations and enough psilocybin mushrooms to kind of shake me up a little bit and shift my perspective was really, really powerful for me. Again, like I'm not somebody who does like a ton of ayahuasca journeys. I don't even like to say how many times I've done it because I feel like that becomes like the spiritual one-upmanship that is kind of toxic in my opinion. But I look at it and think, okay, there are some shifts in my life that happened in those journeys and those experiences and those ceremonies that are now foundational to the way that I view myself and the world. And even little things like, the third night I did ayahuasca, the first ceremony, but the third night of drinking, like just looking at humanity, right? From like zooming out and looking at humanity and just laughing at the silliness. And it's hard to laugh when you think about wars and poverty and struggle, but just being able to zoom out and detach myself and be like, this is just the nature of life. And being able to laugh at the silliness of all of us and trying to infuse that into my life. That's a part of myself that I didn't want to recognize, and probably made me kind of a dick, honestly, until that point. And little things, in mushrooms, like understanding what success is for me, like little things like that I probably could have gotten to a different way. But they were in my life experience, the way that I got there, and I appreciate them for that. But I don't know, and they're definitely not for everybody. But one thing that's really beneficial, well, there's a light in the dark to what's happened with psychedelics now, where they're really easy to get, and that can be really bad. But they're also becoming more and more mainstream to where you can get them in a healthy setting, right? So we're a couple of years away, maybe, from psilocybin and MDMA being used in a therapeutic setting. To me, I'm like, that's the move, right? I wouldn't recommend somebody do it the same way I did it. I would even recommend you do ayahuasca with the people I did the first ayahuasca with the first time. Like I would never recommend that to somebody, right? I would recommend they go to Soltara, where I like have the utmost respect for how they do things. So I kind of learn trial by fire, and I wouldn't push somebody into that. I wouldn't say, hey, I'm going to be like Terrence McKenna and tell you to do 5 grams of mushrooms in a room by yourself in the dark, right? Like that may not be, unless you're really prepared for that, that may not be beneficial for you. And even if 1% of people have a lifetime negative experience out of that, that's not, to me, that's not worth it, right?
Yeah. And it comes back to space, and you allowed yourself space. And as psychedelics and these plant medicines become more popular, I'm seeing people using it as a form of escapism, a form of just numbing, and they're not incorporating what they learned from their experience into their lives. They're just going back for that next fix, just like that next fix of shopping or of sex or of alcohol or of social media. It's a pattern I see everywhere. And it's important to leave that space, in my opinion, to really incorporate what we've learned and put it in action, and incorporate it into our being. And I feel that that's what you have done. So throughout this conversation, you've mentioned a lot of the challenges you've met on the path, everything from your football injury to relationship issues to losing your business to COVID. So let's take a moment to examine the challenges, most notably, like what have been your biggest challenges on the path and how have you overcome them?
Oh man, I think when I look back, most of that has to do, I mean, obviously the football injury, but we kind of spoke about that. That was a lot. And I was young, a lot of that had to do with just age. When I lost my gym, so I had a gym for about 2 years or so. And it wasn't really, I mean, I take responsibility for what happened, but there was real estate fraud on the end of the people who had owned the building we were leasing from. It just became a whole thing. Like like from day one, I was basically in like a legal battle. It was awful. So like my attention was split. And my business partner's father had gotten ALS. So she had to she was not really present. It just like from the jump, like we were set up for failure, and I tried to save it and didn't work out and ended up losing money. It was a whole thing. That to me, again, as we spoke about identity, like my identity was, I'm going to be a business owner. I'm going to be successful. This is what I'm going to do. Right. And I put the blinders on and just did that thing. Like I told myself at 19, I was going to, after I'd kind of recovered from my back injury. So I was probably close to like 20 years old. Was like, I'm going to own a gym. That's what I'm going to do. And I put my fucking blinders on and like did that thing. So 6 years later, here I am, 26, 27 years old with a gym. Didn't ask the right questions, had great mentors around me, didn't ask them good questions either. Like just was so arrogant about the way I handled it, and paid the price for that, really, like literally and mentally. And when I realized that was happening, like that really, that was the biggest blow to my ego / identity that I'd ever had. And that one, and so of course at that same time as when I did ayahuasca, it was like right there towards the end of that experience. So all these things kind of culminated together and allowed me to shift in a way that took months. Like I had to really I think it took about 6 months of just like trying to figure out what the hell to do with my life. You know, I was lost big time. And that was right before I started work. I had a sales job for a few months, and then I moved over to Audit, which really helped a ton, just kind of regain my confidence in myself. But for years that really did like paint my experience. It left me with a lot of fear of starting my own thing. Again, like lack of confidence, like lack of courage to be able to do it. Like I got put in my place, man. Like I really did. Like it was the product of my own arrogance. And I had to recognize that and really feel into that. And that really shifted the way that I live my life. Like that. And that again, like that anxiety and depression that kind of came from that pushed me into interventionism, like mushrooms and other plant medicines, and even spirituality as a whole. So the growth out of that, of course, like I would pay that same, I think I lost about $60,000. I'd pay that money for those lessons now. But at the time, you don't know that, right? At the time, all I could see myself as was a failure. And that's something I've been told since I was a child, that I needed to own my own business to be successful. And I did it, and I failed, and I did it for the right reasons. And I worked really hard, and I thought that's all it took, because that's the story I had been told myself and been told my whole life. And that was wrong. Like, you can do something well for the right reasons and work your ass off and still fail. Like that's just the reality of the situation, unless you're a hedge fund, then you're going to be fine. But no, and that to me was the event of my life that really shaped who I am today, I think. And there's been other things that are on a smaller scale, like leaving Austin was really challenging and kind of going on my own. And that took, but I don't think I would have developed the courage to do that without having that massive cataclysmic failure right in the middle of my, adult life.
One other tool that you haven't mentioned yet that I think you deserve credit for is your journaling practice. You've incorporated journaling a lot on your journey, and you should maybe talk about how that has helped you, because I know, like, I've always saw you in the cafe journaling and just looking inward, and you should give yourself credit for that, because not everyone has the courage to face what is on paper.
Man, I have this journal right here. This is my second one of these. This is a 1 line a day journal, and it's 5 years of journaling, and you do a little paragraph each day. And I love this thing. So this got me started in journaling. And my girlfriend at the time when I did ayahuasca gave me a journal, and I still have it up here behind me on the shelf. And it's kind of my oh shit journal. It's like ayahuasca experiences, breakups, when someone passes away, like when something really challenging happens. I pull that journal out. But other than that, I have these. I realized there was so much going on in my head and in my body that if I could just get it onto a page, right? And this is actually something that Aubrey told me. It's like the page doesn't judge you, right? When you're going through this shit and things are hard, put it on paper, and you can then see your internal dialogue, and you can say, okay, that's valid or that's bullshit, right? You can really see what's going on inside your head. And when in my coaching practice, I would call it clearing the noise. right? The artist way, do like the 2 pages of free flow, just whatever's on your mind. Like you can start it off with, oh, it's like nice outside today, or this coffee tastes like shit, like whatever it is, right? Just start there and see where it goes and force yourself to do 2 pages a day. And then what I started doing from that was, one, clearing this noise. And then I started learning to ask myself really, really challenging questions and answer them honestly. And of course, we're never the best kind of observers of ourselves, right? Like if you have someone that's really, like Kelli sees me better than more clearly than I see myself, because she's an actual objective observer. But through journaling, since it was on the page, I could kind of separate myself from my thoughts. And that was something that I found. I mean, that was years of just every day. I mean, at least 5 or 6 days a week. I would probably miss a day here and there, but putting 2 pages down. And then I started doing the thing where if a question came up in those 2 pages, I'd write that question down and answer it, right? Or explore it. And then with my clients, I would give them quality questions, right? Challenging questions. And they would kind of have to get good at answering these questions for themselves, which was my goal. I was trying to create this positive feedback loop that I created in my own life, right? Where I could ask myself, like, where are you not showing up fully, or something like that. It's hard to answer those, but if you can create a practice of answering those for yourself, when they come up in your head, instead of getting into anxiety and neuroticism and maybe even depression, you can constructively think those things through. And that starts by slowing yourself down. I mean, journaling does so many things. One, it does slow you down because you have to write. You have to take it from your head to a pen and write it on the paper. So you're able to slow yourself down and then observe as it's happening. And you can be midway through a sentence and be like, I believe that about myself, and that is complete horseshit. Right? Like that does not make any sense at all for who I am. That doesn't reflect me at all, but I'm holding on to that belief. Well, now what can I do about it? Right. So it ends up being very pragmatic, and it's not super ethereal or spiritual or anything that's like hard to grasp. It's just this thing that you can put, it's very tangible. And with that, you can see what's going on inside your head. And from that, you can move forward. And I just absolutely love that.
Mm-hmm. So through all the highs and lows that is life, what would you say has been your greatest life lesson learned on your path thus far?
Oh, man, for me, God, that's a hard question to answer. For me, it's just releasing expectations. As cliche as that is, like expecting to know how things are going to go, for me, ends up going poorly more than it ends up going well. Right? Like there's this openness to experience. I value openness to experience so much. And to me, that means like, and that means that I have to release shame. I have to release judgment. I have to be okay with something not working. But that openness to like, no matter if this thing is a success or a failure or whatever it needs to be labeled as, I'm going to take something from it and that's going to move me forward. And that openness to experience has given me so much context. I feel like it's given me the better decision-making ability. I feel like I could feel into my body more if I have this feeling and I go do something, it doesn't work out. Like, okay, maybe I'm dialing in my intuition there, right? It's like I'm touching the hot stove and then learning not to touch the hot stove, right? Mm-hmm. That openness to experience is something I've just like, when I worked with my clients, that was like our main focus for us. Unless they are already kind of ranked high in that, then we would do something different. But that to me is just understanding that about yourself, understanding where you are, like taking the Big 5 exam from understandmyself.com. And this whole thing, just that, I just keep coming back to this, like openness to experience is just one of the most valuable components of my personality. And for me, it's something that I was kind of in retrospect kind of had as a part of my life, but it's something that I try and share with other people as well. And once I realized it was a part of who I was, I really doubled down on that. Like I just was like, openness to experience is incredibly valuable. I know that now. Live through that, like make that a foundational principle of your life.
Mm-hmm. And as you incorporate this into your new normal and help your clients with this, one thing that will come up for you and for your clients is resistance. And Stephen Pressfield talks about resistance as that negative force that keeps us from fulfilling our dreams. So what are your daily strategies at facing and overcoming resilience?
For me,
resistance.
Yeah. It depends on which kind of resistance it is, right? So Pressfield's writing on this is really, really great. And I think what he's talking about is this kind of like external resistance and internal resistance, but it depends on where that's coming from. To me, it's really important to understand, is that resistance coming from me knowing that this isn't right? right? Is that more of my conscience? Is it my conscience speaking, or is it like my ego speaking, right? Like knowing where that resistance is coming from. And if it's coming from people outside of my life, or those people that I trust, right? People that have my best interest in mind, those people that value me being exactly how I am today, right? So it's more nuanced. But generally speaking, the most important thing I can do to kind of overcome resistance, and I have this a lot, especially with the Connor Wander show, because there's so much that goes into that, is structure and doing the thing. Like once I turn the microphone on, once I turn the cameras on, and my run sheet is up, if my notes aren't perfect, if everything isn't right, like I'm going to show up, right? I'm going to deliver. And I have confidence in myself to do the things I've always done well, right? Whatever that is, like everybody has strengths and weaknesses of the personality. I know where my strengths are, and I can lean onto those. Whenever there's resistance, I just lean onto my strengths. Like, hey, maybe your run sheet for this show, or this thing you want to post, this thing you want to do, isn't as fully formed, and your neuroticism is kind of running over that, and you're feeling resistance to turning the camera on and hitting record. Just do it anyways, because you can always edit it. You can always change it. You can always start over. I mean, I've started shows over numerous times. I've been halfway through a show and been like, this is shit, and started over, and that show's better. But like, it's easier to stop and start over than it is to start in the first place. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like, if you need to fuck up. It's like, again, then you learn something. Like maybe the way that I prepared for this is different. Maybe that, and then you end up with like just by doing the thing, even if you fuck it up, well, now you have a strategy to do it better next time.
Absolutely. It's all learning. It is all learning. Before I ask my final 3 questions, I asked all guests, we had like a really great conversation before the podcast, and I just want to hear your views on that. And that has to do with drugs, in particular, marijuana, cannabis. So I am having the opportunity to be a part of another Canadian national program. I was a national ambassador for Adidas physical activity program. And now I'm part of a national youth cannabis awareness program where I'll be speaking to youth 12 to 24 about recreational cannabis from a harms reduction, non-judgmental approach. I saw you wrote on your Instagram today something about the DARE program. We are not the DARE program. And I think that's so important. And what my goals with the program is to move beyond the conversation of cannabis and go deeper at the foundation of why people use cannabis. And the foundation why people use cannabis, but cannabis is just a synonym for alcohol, pharmaceutical drugs, other drugs, sex, shopping, social media, et cetera, et cetera. It's used to escape from pain. And why pain? And the answer to that is trauma. Dr. Gabor Mate, one of my hugest inspirations and someone that's inspiring me and our program, talks about how the root of all addiction is pain, and the root of that pain is trauma. So just what is your advice for me with this program, and how to leave a best impact in our Canadian youth, and in turn really the world, because we're in Canada one of the first in the world to be doing a program like this since we've legalized cannabis, one of the first. So we're setting the standard for what this future cannabis awareness program will look internationally. And I do not want it to look like the DARE program, because we know the effect of that. And it had people using more drugs.
Yeah, I was like, hey, only the cool kids do drugs. And you're like, I want to be cool. When the cool kids try to get you to do drugs, don't do them. It's like that's a failing strategy, Mrs. Bush. Sorry. So I think, so I went through the DARE program in Texas, which was like it's similar to like abstinence only education for sex, right? Like abstinence is a component to this, right? It's an option, but it's not your only option to having safe sex, right? So, I mean, abstinence isn't safe sex; it's no sex. So, it's not maybe not the safest option either. So, when you look at this, what I think was missing in that was one, and I think we do this a lot as Americans, and I don't know if you guys are the same, but like we don't even give the honest history of how these drugs became illegal, right? Because what happens, the reason that marijuana is a gateway drug, or that was, this whole thing, is because you've now put marijuana and heroin in the same category, which they don't belong in the same. Marijuana and cocaine don't belong in the same category. Like, so there's so many of these things that don't belong in the same category, right? There's a spectrum of damage that can be caused by different types of substances, right? I would say alcohol on the whole is more damaging than marijuana, right? Yeah. Maybe able to have that conversation. right? You can be addicted to any of these things. And I think one of the things that you do a really good job of is labeling all the things you could be numbing yourself by doing: video games, weed, Coke, whatever that thing is, right? What are you hiding there? What's hiding underneath that desire to do this all the time? If it becomes habitual. And then I think one of the most important things we can do here is give people a real life example of what, like, because the idea that what they did with the DARE program, for example, was so hyperbolic. It was like one day you're smoking a joint, next day you're shooting up in the bathroom. You know what I mean? It's like in your OD on the floor, and it's like that all happened in the span of like a week or a one lifetime. It's like, that's not how that happens. Like, realistically, if you start smoking weed every day at 13, you're going to pay the consequences for that. Right? You start smoking weed every day at the age of 25, right? To go to sleep, or maybe it helps you chill out at the end of the day. Maybe you have a high stress job. Unlikely that you'll have any negative side effects from that unless you have some kind of pre-existing neurological condition, which is important to understand the risks, right? But it's more about having an appropriate relationship with these substances, or being around them. To think that a kid's never going to be around weed or never going to be around Coke by the time they're 20, 22, 25 is naive, right? So you need to have a conversation about the real consequences. Like, listen, if you get Coke that is cut with fentanyl, you could literally die. That being said, most Coke isn't cut with fentanyl, right? It's cut with baking soda, right? Like, you're just giving people an honest understanding of like what these drugs are, what their impacts are, versus just trying to scare people out of doing these things. Because if you give a kid an understanding of like, if you can give them the tools now to go, okay, when I'm 19 and I'm in college and I'm smoking weed every day, right? And maybe not even in college, because that's normal in college, right? Everybody goes through a stoner phase, whatever, maybe you're later on, you're like, I'm smoking weed a lot. Like, why would I be doing that? And giving them the tools to really reflect on that. The journaling is a great example of like, maybe understand like, why do I feel like I need to smoke weed every day? If I needed to stop for a month, could I do it? Like, asking yourself those really important questions, like these strategies of understanding what these substances are really doing in your body, versus taking this like Nancy Reagan era, just say no tactics, right? Like, that doesn't really, you're not respecting the intellect of a child, right? Like, these are young adults. By respecting them and treating them like young adults, and having honest dialogue and honest conversations about the actual consequences, not the perceived consequences, not the worst case scenario only, but like, hey, listen, if you start getting high too much as a kid, you're going to have motivation issues down the road, and it's going to become your crutch forever. And that's just how it goes. Does that mean you're going to be a worthless human being that doesn't deserve love, that's overdosing in a motel? Probably not. But you're probably not going to get the most out of your life either. You know what I mean? And if you rely on cocaine to have a good time, which I know a lot of guys who do that, right? And not that I've done cocaine before, I understand. And that's one thing too, is like, I talk about this stuff because I've done most things aside from like, I don't like prescription drugs, right? But having a conversation like, hey, just because something is in a prescription bottle doesn't mean it's safe. You're more likely to die from taking your parents' OxyContin recreationally than you are from smoking weed or eating mushrooms or doing LSD. You know what I mean? But we have to have a specific conversation about different types of drugs and which ones actually kill the most people, right? Which we would say pharmaceutical drugs far and away. Right. And knowing that, right, just because it's prescribed, just because you broke your leg playing sports and your doctor, or you get your wisdom teeth pulled out and your doctor gave you 25 OxyContin, doesn't mean you need to take 25 OxyContin. You know what I mean? Yeah. Maybe take a third of one as needed. And then when you get done, flush the rest down the toilet. You know what I mean? Like that, because that's how addiction really happens. Addiction doesn't normally happen from weed to blow to heroin. It happens from OxyContin to heroin, or OxyContin to weed to heroin, right? But we don't ever consider that because it was prescribed because somebody had a surgery. Well, now that we take that out of the thing, it's like, oh, we just overlap the fact that you were on OxyContin for 6 months. And then we just talk about how you went from weed to heroin because you're chasing high. And I think that's more realistic, right? It's just giving them the real life stories and not bringing in some former addict who has undisclosed amount of trauma and scaring these kids into doing a thing. Now, whenever they smoke a joint, they're going to feel like, now, well, I've already crossed the line. I might as well try everything else. It's like the gateway drug thing was like a chicken and an egg situation to me. It's like, well, you told everyone it was a gateway drug, so it became a self-fulfilling prophecy versus being honest about what the actual effects of these drugs are.
Absolutely. And it comes back to what you talk about politics. It's painting the full picture, not just giving them this one narrow view and saying this is truth. It's showing what the truth is on all spectrums, and then enabling them critical thinking skills where they can wield their own choice, because at the end of the day, that is our most powerful of freedoms, and we are free human beings and we can do what we wish with our information. So it's presenting it all balanced, rather than like in politics. If you're only watching CNN, well, then you're going to think this is right. If you're only watching Fox News, well, you're going to think this is right. And it's the approach you use with politics is you examine the whole spectrum and then make your own decisions, make your own judgments, learn.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that's really important to teach people about drugs, I always say this to people whenever we're talking about, especially psychedelics, once you take it, you can always take more, but you can never take less once it's inside your body. So it's like, just start small. Maybe don't eat that whole brownie. And if the brownie isn't working for a while, maybe wait a little longer. But you don't want to eat 50 milligrams of weed and then be like, oh wow, I'm in like the most terrifying experience of my life. Like you can always, that's the thing. That's the kind of conversations I'll have with my kids, right? Because if my kids don't have some psychedelic experience or some drug experience, like I think that's a valuable component to life. I think Sam Harris and I actually got that from Sam Harris. Was him like, yeah, I don't really do LSD anymore, but I think if my daughters never did, 100 micrograms of LSD, they'd be missing out on something really beautiful about life. And that's the kind of conversations I'll have. It's like, that's one of the things that they'll know. It's like, and they'll probably be saying this to their friends. Like, you can always take more, but you can never take less.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's an important thing to know. Like that will keep you out of trouble, right? Versus being like, oh, I've got to be the big guy and like do this thing. And that's how people get in trouble with this stuff. Same thing with drinking is the same deal, like you can always drink more if you want, but you can't ever like unbeer bong 6 beers if you do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your view on that topic. So to close, I have 3 questions. And the first one, this world, there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of fear going on. And I think love is the answer to a lot of this. What does love mean though to you?
Dude, you hit me with these deep philosophical questions. I think, really, and this is outside of relationships or even friendships, but it's just really, truly seeing people. Like, and that can be the homeless guy at the convenience store, or your partner or your parents, but just giving people the opportunity to be seen. To me, that really, and that's like humanitarian love. And that may mean, trying to look at people that are living in a completely different circumstance through a different lens. But to me, that's a great way to live.
I really admire that definition.
Even if the Trump supporters.
Yeah. Everyone. Okay.
Everyone except, but everyone, yes.
Yeah. Okay, the next question. In 3 words, how would you describe the experience you were having on this earth?
Oh. Oh man, it's hard to put this into 3 words, dude. You're putting the shackles on me here. Curiously thought-provoking.
Curiously thought-provoking. Excellent.
I don't even know but it feels right.
Yeah. Okay, my last question. So I believe we all have magic powers, and I am a magician, and I'm going to transport us into the future. I'm going to take us into a time where we're alongside an 85-year-old Connor Moore. What does that life, an 85-year-old Connor Moore, what does that life look like? What does your life look like at 85? And what is the legacy that you've left behind?
Well, I think at 85, if I make it to 85, I'll be pretty beat up because I'm pretty hard on myself. But, as far as a legacy, this is going to be so simple and maybe kind of a cop out, but I just want to be able to look back, like just put myself 85. You and I are sitting in rocking chairs on the front porch of looking out at the horizon. I don't really want to have to say anything. I just want to look back and be able to smile at what I did. You know what I mean? Like just that, whether that's my family, my career, whatever it is, just look back and go like, damn, that was a ride, And then I think there's a place in that where you're also ready for what comes next. And having no idea what that is.
So I want you to picture this Connor Moore smiling in his rocking chair, smiling about his family, his relationships, the business, and everything in between. And I'm not going to just leave us stranded in the future with that beat up Connor Moore. I'm going to bring us back to the now. I'm going to bring us back to the right here and now, 2021. And that 85-year-old Connor Moore sends you a message. What does he tell you?
Oh man. Honestly, as weird as it is, it's just be big, man. Just be big and loud. Like that just resonates with me so much. I don't know what about it. I've been told that since I was a baby CrossFit coach. It's just like, be big, dude. Just be, you've got it. Just be big.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Connor. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on this podcast and catch up. Where could the listeners find you?
Yeah, man. The best place to find me is at Connor Wanders on Instagram. Connor with an E, Wanders with an A. And I link everything that I do on there, so it's easy to find all the podcasts through Instagram. It's the best place to find me. And I've just gotten on to Clubhouse, which has actually been really, really fun. So you can find me there as well.
Excellent. So to close all episodes, we bring our fists together for a digital fist bump. We all have a choice to be a winner. Boom.
Boom. Let me get it up here. Oh, I'm on this camera. Boom.
Boom. There we go.
Oh, man, I love you, dude. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And that is a wrap on today's conversation.